So I know there's going to be, some clinking of silverware and stuff, but it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Greg Siskin to our podium for our keynote speech today. So Greg, if you don't know him, is well, he's been doing this for a while. I'm not sure I'll say how long, except he's been helping immigrants and serving as a leader of the National Immigration Bar for, several decades. In 1994, he created the first immigration law firm website. In 1998, he became the first lawyer with a blog. And in 2016, he became one of the first lawyers to begin publishing artificial intelligence immigration tools for both lawyers and consumers. He's the author of 7 books, hundreds of articles and book chapters, as well as a number of immigration-related pieces of legislation, and has testified as an expert in front of the U.S. House of Representatives Immigration Subcommittee. He is also a co-founder of Impact litigation, specializing in mass immigration litigation, and is currently counsel on cases challenging the $1,000 H-1B fee, mass student visa revocations, and the ban on USCIS benefits adjudications for people from 39 countries. I have no idea what he's going to say, except what we did is we said, you've been using these tools. This is an interesting moment. How do we use these tools to address this moment? And so with that very wide open request, I give you Greg Siskin.
Thanks, and I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about either. I do a lot of talks about immigration, and the last few years I do a lot of talks about AI, but I don't really get to talk that much about innovation or sort of about the evolution of the tech over the decades. And for the record, it's 1990 was when I started practicing. But today what I thought I would talk about would be focusing on the evolution of basically my journey in legal tech through 3 major eras in tech that affected all of society, but certainly had an effect on immigration law. And that included the internet in the 90s, and I'll be showing you sort of like what I was up to then and sort of what my mission was then and how it solved personal issues for me as well as helped me launch my practice. I'm going to move on to social media and the 2000s, and then I'm going to talk about AI and sort of each time innovating and reinventing what I'm working on. By the way, this graphic I put on there because, first of all, I like the title. This is from 2003 for the ABA Journal. That picture is not in Chicago, as it looks like I'm on a high rise. It was actually taken in Memphis on a railroad in South Memphis with no buildings around. It was a really good use of Photoshop at the time. On there, but I picked it because it's sort of like also part of the theme from early on, not the risking failure part of it, and there was a lot of that, but the fakery. I was talking, I think, to Sam Glover earlier about, at the beginning it was all about how to prove that I'm actually competent to do the kind of work that I was doing. So let's start. So that's me from my law school photo from my 3rd year of law school. I'm actually 22 in that picture on there. It's relevant only because I was pretty immature, and I'm taking the LSAT as a teenager, and I'm in law school already when I'm 19, and that matters only because I had no idea what law was about, and I figured this is a good, everybody says, oh, a law degree is super useful on there, and even if you don't know what you're going to do, you should go to law school. And so I went in really with not very much of an idea of what lawyers do, or why I should be a lawyer, or whether I was really suited for it or not. And I left law school sort of with the same mentality, but I had some loans at that point, and I went to a large law firm in Nashville, Tennessee. I went to undergraduate there, and I decided to just go back there until I figured out what I was going to be. And I thought when I finished law school, I would maybe be in the profession 2-3 years on there before I moved on to something else. So that it was really true. And I didn't have an area that I really wanted to be in. So I was in the corporate law department because the firm I worked for, that's where they decided that they were going to put me. So I was doing lots of due diligence and super boring projects. But it was sort of an inadvertent thing one day where an immigration law project was assigned to me, and that project was an epiphany for me that there was something that was super interesting, and I loved everything about it. I loved that it was complicated, and I loved that there were real people and not just closing, corporate lawyers, and no offense against the corporate lawyers out there, but it's just not the same experience. People that are having real problems, and that I could, and the work was just really meaningful. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I, unfortunately, my law firm didn't think so at the time. It was just a one-off, but I did have a reason to stay in the profession at that point. And so that's, I guess, one lesson for the law students in the room. Others is that is just be patient, and eventually, hopefully, something, hopefully you'll find the perfect thing that you want to be in right at the beginning. But it may take a little while. This was actually still in the first year that I at least got that case, but it would be a couple of years before I could actually really do something about it. So that was the reason to stay. That happened in 1991, where I got that case. The other thing that happened in 1991, and I was talking to the dean about this a little while ago. He was talking about his upbringing, where he was fell in love with computers at a young age and all that. That wasn't my experience. That's the computer that I bought in 1991 at CompUSA. Some of you may remember that store. I think they're gone. It's a CompuDyne, and it was bought for a very specific reason, and it wasn't because I love computers and tech and all that. It's because I was a junior associate at a large law firm. At the time, you had secretaries because you had depended on secretaries to be able to get work turned around, and I shared a secretary with a partner who dominated the secretary's time. My work wasn't getting done. I used the little cassettes and recorded and gave the tapes to the word processing department, and they weren't turning things around, and I was afraid I was going to be fired. So I bought this thing that was designed to keep me employed, so I could just get my hand the floppy disk to word processing, and they can go and print it out, because I didn't even have a printer at the time, which printing on a laser printer, I think they had them already at the time. It was already super expensive for that, and that was not going to be part of it. But I think this thing set me back about $3,000 at the time. Now, one of the things that I did, because this was super expensive, what wasn't super expensive was to get a modem. And I bought a modem that was one of these dial-up things that you just plugged into the back of the CompuDyne. And they were heavily advertising at the time CompuServe. Anybody in the room old enough to know CompuServe? Probably some of you had accounts on there. A lot of people with the same hairline as me saying yes on there. So I got this account, and CompuDyne had these bulletin boards, and there were one or two that were on immigration law, but they had a gateway. That's what they called them at the time, to AOL and CompuServe and Prodigy. They all had these gateways that they were selling to this new thing called the internet. Now, the internet was not what we think of the internet. The internet was just thousands of bulletin boards. Basically, were probably 95% of the people that were using the internet in the early 1990s, and this is 1991. So there were immigration law news groups, is what they call them, Usenet news groups, and I was starting to pay attention to what was being said. No lawyers on these groups, just immigrants, mostly at tech companies, mostly in universities, because that's who had access to the internet at that point. And I would go and research and answer the question, and suddenly I was getting some matters of my own that were coming in, and the law firm was actually not super pleased about that because they really just wanted me working on what I was supposed to be working on. But that's what was going on for about 2 years with me, and then 1993. A couple of big things happened for me. One was the Mosaic browser. Who remembers Mosaic? Also, probably a lot of the gray hairs in the room. The Mosaic was a project from the University of Illinois, and it's the first graphic web browser. This is before Chrome. This is before all of the ones, and this was the first on there. And the Mosaic browser was I remember the article. It was a New York Times article, and there was mention, I think the Vatican, of all places, had a website that you could access through it. And it's like, that's interesting on there as far as people, how people, I think, are going to access information. Second thing that happened was the law firm. I went to them, and it's like, I really want to do this practice area. I think it's going to be, there's hardly anybody in Nashville that's doing immigration law. This is going to be a big thing. And they said no on there. As long as I billed 2,000 hours to the corporate department, I could do whatever I wanted beyond that. And it was like, well, I think that's a message. The last thing I bought was this is the book. It took me a while to find a graphic of the cover of this book, but this was a book about HTML design. There were no places you could go to say, I want a website, design it for me. It didn't exist. So you had to basically, you're on your own. I did hire a graphic designer to make a little banner graphic that I could have on the on a website. But I started in 1993 planning a website. And that website was, the plan was, I was engaged and we were getting married over Memorial Day weekend, and I would give my notice to the firm sometime in April, and then I would go get married, and then we would go on a honeymoon, and then we would come back, and I would open up my doors for my law firm with my website, and I would be the first lawyer in the world, because there were no lawyers yet in 1993 that had websites, and I just it was immature, and I just assumed that the world would stop for my needs on there. So I did all of that, and I was ready to go, and I had and then over the honeymoon, when I got back, I mean, it could have happened before. I don't know what dates Aaron Fox and Venable opened their websites. There's one person in the room probably knows the answer to that. But so I was not the first. I was first immigration lawyer. I was first, I had an email newsletter that went with it, and I'm pretty sure I was the first one to distribute by email a newsletter. And there were some other firsts, but a lot of people, I get introductions and say, you were the first lawyer online with a website. It's like, that is not true. Even if yes, you got it right. So I always make that correction. Anyways, and it was great because the media, no one wanted to write about the corporate law firm in Washington, D.C. that opened up a website. They wanted to write about the solo immigration lawyer in Nashville that had it. So it was New York Times and NPR and Wall Street Journal and just tons and tons of media. I think I had like 45 articles written in that first 5 years that had something to do with the website. And then I wrote this book for the ABA that came out in a couple editions. So my mission, and I'm telling you all this sort of like at the beginning, was just credibility. I mean, I just really honestly, it was just like survival. How do I get in the small city, Nashville, which is, it's a big deal now. Back in the 90s, it was seen as a backwater without a lot of immigration work. And I was trying to figure out I'm in a federal practice area. Everything's filed by mail, still largely filed by mail. It is the perfect area for an online practice. And I knew that at the time. And I knew that I could use this website to, for the first phase of things, the mission was to demonstrate thought leadership and competence. So most of what I put online early on was just reporting on what news is happening in immigration law, and then writing. I did these things I used to write in the newsletters called the ABCs of Immigration, and it was sort of an in-depth article on immigration topics. And that was a large part of the focus early on, and that's and that was part of it. The other part of it is that this is a tech talk, but actually this old-fashioned thing called print books made a big difference in my practice as well. Um, the book that's on the J Visa guidebook, the black one up there, that was a book that Lexis, it still publishes as it comes out annually. I just basically, and my name is still on there, even though I haven't contributed to the book in a bunch of years on there. But that was all a play to get physician immigration because that's what was in Nashville. Hospital systems, HCA, community health systems, Vanguard. There's a bunch of hospital systems that there were there. No tech companies. There were, at the time, there are now on there. But this was an example of sort of the fake it till you make it. It's like I didn't have a single doctor case, but I figured if I wrote a book, and this book was like the size of the Manhattan telephone pages on there. It was huge on there because it was just a collection of a lot of resources and a couple hundred pages of text on there. But I knew that a book would be a great way to demonstrate that I had knowledge on it. And I could literally say I wrote the book on there. People sort of were challenging whether I knew something about it or not. But the content creation is really coming full circle now because the modes that AI company, in legal tech, sort of the one protection companies have that are in legal tech from the cause and the others, and we're reading about these all the time, is their data sets. And, publishing and having content is a great thing. So that theme will come up a little bit later. But over the years, I've been, that's when I'm not doing tech projects. That's the other thing I'm usually working on is either is on a writing project, and the writing now funnels into the tech in a pretty significant way. So that was I wanted to stop there for the first part of it, the early internet part of it, and and I tried to think of sort of like what are sort of the lessons to take away from that. And one is that I think Burgess Allison, from who wrote a great book on one of the first books for lawyers on the internet for the ABA, who used to always say content is king. On there, and I still think content is king. But at the time, that's what made successful websites, and later on, that's what makes successful social media feeds, and ultimately, that's what makes AI work well. Is when the content is really high quality. Finding places that are not populating, getting there early, and staking your claim. It is there were a bunch of immigration lawyers that had websites up by about 1996 on there. In fact, I think immigration lawyers probably really punched above their weight as far as the number of early websites that were online for lawyers. But being first made a difference as far as the PR and everything else that went. And then the last thing I put on there is unexpected opportunities are the plan on there, which is being. I didn't come out of law school. I didn't even come, most of the things that sort of really worked well were not in the plan on there, but it was being receptive to those things when they came that made a big difference, and being, recognizing that this is going to represent big change, and I should be open to it. Okay. Moving on, I put this as 2000 to 2015 because I think this is when most people think of the social media era, but it actually started with me a little bit earlier on here. So this is it was actually 1997 that I started this thing on my website that was basically starting to track legislation, things that were going on in Washington affecting immigration, starting to urge my readers, and there was a lot of readers to the website because there was an audience that was super hungry for just information on immigration. It didn't exist anywhere where you can easily find it, information on how the U.S. immigration system works. So that that was great on there. But once I started having a big audience, I realized that sort of like there are certain things that you can do beyond just informing them about what immigration law is, and you could actually work with the people that are reading it to achieve things. So there was some significant immigration legislation that was moving in 1997 on H-1B visas and some other things that were big. They're big now. They were big then, and I started this log, and I would post updates every day about what was happening. And you can see in this one, I'm posting phone numbers and some email addresses that some members of Congress had back then, and telling people, what the legislation was about, and you should email or call members and talk about that. This is it's maybe a little easier to read, but and then this part is sort of like the part that I want to really blow up, because I'm not interested in saying whether the claim is true or not that it was the first blog. What you're seeing, and I've pulled this off of archive.org or the Wayback Machine just to kind of refresh my memory on it. But it's not that was important. It was the advocacy part of it, and that's really what led over the next several years for me, sort of a big change in sort of the mission that I was on as far as the tech goes. So over the next few years, I discovered, like many of you, some various platforms, but made a point of getting on them early. And I had switched from that FTP upload, text upload, download thing that you just saw to blogger.com a couple of years after that, and had a blog there. But 2004. Set up a LinkedIn account. I had to look that up recently because I couldn't remember when it was up, because I knew it was a long time. I put up a Facebook account, and then eventually just decided Facebook was always going to be something just I use for personal stuff instead of for the firm. And then Twitter, which was, I think, started in 2007. And I had to look also, and my account was open in 2008, so it was pretty early. Twitter was the one that really my usage numbers really went up a lot on there. And right now, if you go to my Twitter account, which is G Siskin, there's still like 84,000 followers there. Still going up. I have no idea sort of why, because I still post on there occasionally, but not nearly as much as I used to. But back in the day, that was that was something that you could really use to move people in a hurry. And I wanted to just tell two quick stories on things that happened with Twitter in my practice that made a big difference on two different subjects, and they're both in the first Trump administration. How many of you remember that weekend that Trump got inaugurated, when the travel ban, the Muslim ban, came into effect, and all the lawyers around the country headed to the airports? Remember that? Some of you should all, hopefully most of you remember that. Even the law students hopefully remember that on there. But this was I had, one of the phenomena I had was I would get tips from people of things to put in my blog, or some of them were sort of leaked things from government officials. Some of them were things that were happening with other immigration lawyers. And my friend Ali Ballour, who was an LA lawyer who was at LAX that first weekend, called me up, and he's like, "You will not believe what I have to tell you on here." And it's like, "What?" He said, "We have reports from family members that are on two different planes, one coming from Europe and Germany, one coming from the Middle East, and there are air marshals that are going up and down the aisles asking who has a green card and handing them an I-407 form, which is the form to surrender your green card and abandon your green card status." He was like, "You have got to be kidding me." So this was I think you can see on here, there were like 7,200 reposts of that one post. And I was like, my whole point on this was to get the attention of reporters. And I have a couple hundred reporters that follow me on here. But it immediately got shut down as far as the reaction from CBP and the marshals saying that shouldn't be happening. It's not going to be happening, and nobody lost their green cards on there. I don't know, if it was just this, but I like to think it was happening in real time. That was a way for these lawyers to suddenly get out to the entire country in a way that traditional media couldn't do on there. And so that was one story. The other one was actually involving somebody who became my client. And this was a story of a woman that was going to a green card interview by herself with her U.S. citizen husband for an adjustment of status to get a green card. And she was 5 months pregnant, and she was a high-risk pregnancy. She was a stroke risk. She was on blood pressure medication, and really it was already a stressful enough experience going to a green card interview. She gets arrested at the interview. Why was she arrested? Because she had something called an in absentia deportation order, which meant that she had been ordered by a court deported, but she had moved out of the city a long time before and never knew about it. Very common problem in immigration law, and it's a fixable problem. But in her case, they detained her, they put her on a bus, and they started sending her on a 9-hour bus ride to a detention center in Louisiana. So her husband immediately contacted the law firm, and I get, at my door, it was one of our associates and a paralegal, and they explained the problem to me. And it's like, it's Friday afternoon. We are never going to be able to find people, and this woman is we're thinking this woman's going to have a stroke on us. So I reached out to a couple of influencer friends that I knew had big followings that were out, not in law. And I made a blog post explaining the situation that they could link to with a call to action, which was call the detention center and tell them, send this woman back home immediately and make sure she has medical care. And they were sending her without her medications. That was another part of it, is they didn't even deal with that issue. That was an amazing thing. Thousands of phone calls were made that night to that detention center, and that was and that woman was home the next night. As soon as she got there, they put her in a car. They sent her to a doctor, and then the next morning, as soon as it was light out again, they drove the entire way back, and she was with her husband the next night. You couldn't do that with a website. You could do that with social media, and that's when I started to realize how powerful those types of tools are for lawyers, and not just the traditional stuff. If we filed a lawsuit on there, it would have taken weeks probably before we had anything, even getting a TRO or something like that. It was probably not going to happen that quickly. So that I wanted to tell that story sort of as the last story about social media. A lot of lessons can be learned to that, but it was sort of a natural transition to the third phase of tech in my career on AI. And I was super excited that two people are in the room today that had something to do with at least the early part of my experience with AI starting in 2015. Toma Officer, who is going to be speaking later, who is with Community Lawyers / Afterpattern, now with Net Documents, and then Jonathan, who got the award earlier today with DocAssemble. Those were really critical to some of the stuff that I was doing on the advocacy work. That was tied into what we were doing in social media. And sort of like one other theme is that the early stuff that I was doing in writing in the website and the email part of my career fed into what I would be doing on the advocacy side of things with social media later. But social media and the advocacy work really fed into nicely what we started doing with apps and with AI tools. So moving on, Toma reminded me of something that we started building these apps actually with Neotologic initially. And Neotologic was a great product and on there, but it was really, their audience was large law firms, and we got them to agree to a very nice discount for us, but we couldn't, that ended and we couldn't afford that product anymore. So we were trying to look for solutions. And then my friend Reed Trouts had said, there's this product called Community Lawyer. You really should check it out. They might be exactly what you need on there. And it gave us all the functionality that we had with Neotologic, plus it was actually, frankly, a lot easier to use on there. But what we were building starting in 2016, we started experimenting in 2015. We released our first app in 2016. It was those apps were essentially what you were seeing earlier today with these great presentations from the law students on there, but basically sort of taking users through an interview and then being able to build out either a document or an answer to a question. And what was happening, and we actually built one for the DAPA program, which was the Obama administration was going to be releasing this, have this program to have millions of parents of DACA and others get a legal status similar to DACA. And there was a Supreme Court decision that was due on it, and we built this app in both Spanish and English, and we were completely ready to go on there. And then the Supreme Court gave it the kibosh, and it didn't happen. So we went through this exercise of our first app never actually saw the light of day because the court. But our goal was to, like, Supreme Court issues its decision affirming the President Obama. We're going to turn this app on the next minute. So didn't happen on there, but we did have a bunch. But when Trump came in, there was like lots of opportunities to come up with apps, particularly regarding the numerous travel bans that were going on. And what you see here is sort of showing this sort of evolution with social media. The top is a tweet of announcing that that Trump is going to sign this order today or tomorrow. I'm going to go on Periscope. Anybody remember Periscope on there? I'm going to go on Periscope. I'm going to talk about give my take on what it's. We'll do a Facebook Live. And then we're going to release the app right after we kind of do this thing where we explain to people what's going on in this. And then that's the bottom part is the first page of the app, which I believe is from After Pattern or Community Lawyer on there. And Tomo told me one of those that we did. I don't know if it was this one or not. I think it was on there where we shut down the servers for Community Lawyer in one evening because there was too much traffic that was coming on it. But that was and now it's sort of like, is it AI? I mean, these expert systems, and it was a primitive form of what we on there, but it's AI on there. It's basically you're sort of offloading intelligent decisions to a piece of software. It's not generative AI and it's not machine learning AI, but it is a form of AI. So that's where things, we were building largely on that platform. And then in 2022, I got asked to speak at ABA Tech Show on AI, and I was just going to be talking about, and I did talk about the community, the After Pattern apps and things we were working on, but I was paired with this guy, Pablo Arredondo. Who knows Pablo Arredondo here? Few people. This is somebody you should know. Pablo was a co-founder of Casetext, and Casetext had a deal with OpenAI, and they were one of the partner organizations that were developing using OpenAI in their products before ChatGPT came out. So Pablo and I got on a Zoom call. I think it was probably like September, so I don't know when the ABA invitations go out, but it was shortly after the invitation went out, but it was before I had seen ChatGPT. And we're doing a Zoom screen share, and he's showing me CoCounsel that at the time was just in beta, and it was only a handful of firms that were using it. And I was blown away on there this is the first time most people probably, a lot of people may remember like the first time you actually saw generative AI in action, and you were probably like, wow, that's incredible on there. And that was my initial reaction to what he was showing me on there. And then I was telling him what I was doing, and I was telling him I'm working on this case for 150,000 Ukrainians, and we're trying to get them, they're supposed to be getting automatic work authorization. That was part of this legislation from Congress. And we're suing them. We're suing the Biden administration because they are forcing people to file for work cards, and it's going to take like 8 months to get a work card based on what the backlogs were looking like. And this legislation said they're supposed to get all the same benefits as refugees. Refugees get automatic work authorization. They don't have to apply for this card. They just get, by being admitted to the United States, they can go start work. So that's what we were suing over, and it was pretty, and this was 2022 for Ukrainians. They're all just getting here, and they're all sitting on their couches because they are not allowed to work. And it was, actually from a mental health standpoint, that's one of the best things that you can do for refugees is give them the ability to go out and work on there. So I was telling him about this case, and he asked me, would you try our product, and would you be one of our beta testers and use this in your Ukrainian suit? And I said, absolutely, on there. So I was just excited to have it. And by the way, they were using GPT-4. That was a model that was built into CoCounsel before GPT 3.5 was out. And that was like a super way better than it would have been in 3.5. So they already had a great product even before anybody was actually using it. But that's a picture of MSNBC. They had debuted their product on Morning Joe. I don't know who their PR person was, their marketing person, but the person should get the gold medal for legal marketing, where they basically got to debut their product the day before Tech Show, because that was where the product was officially, I think, going to be announced and debuted. And they did a demo live on the air and that was also sort of like walking, on a tightrope without a net under you, where I think they told me they had to like basically shut down everybody's access to the product while they were doing that, just to make sure the answers wouldn't take any longer than necessary. And they gave them the January 6th report. Was they had that fed in, and they knew their audience on that show on there, but they gave the host the opportunity to ask questions about the January 6th report to co-counsel, and the AI shot out really good answers. And I was on basically as the regular lawyer who was explaining how we were using the product in our case on there, and they also did something that was sort of an epiphany for me as well, which was so I write on the first the thing where you saw the books at the beginning. There's one book in particular that is basically my legacy book, and it's this thing called the AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association Practice and Procedures Manual. A very dry title. Everybody in immigration law knows it though as the AILA cookbook, and I write that with my law partner. And this is basically the systems manual for immigration law firms, and it's how you do. Right now, it's 25 major types of cases. Each chapter is about 200 pages. The book is 4,200 pages right now. They asked if I could upload the book and start using it and to ask questions, basically of myself, essentially. And it worked on there. I would ask it questions, and it gave a really nice answer based on the stuff that was in that book and doing a lot of other things. So. We had initially talked about potentially working with co-counsel on doing an immigration product, but we're a pretty small bar. There's only 18,000 members of our association, and most lawyers are in the bar. So we didn't have we didn't see much that, and also their price point was never going to work for immigration law. So we decided to build out Visa AI, and part of it as well is sort of what was going in when we were thinking about it. And we just heard a really great panel about access to justice on here. But immigration law, there's a couple things to note. One is that we are the lowest paid of any practice area. There have been reports about, on there, and it's like not a surprise on there. You go into immigration law because you love it, and it's a wonderful thing to do. And it's every immigration lawyers, we're all in it together. It's the most collegial bar. It is a completely different way of life, I think, than what most lawyers are used to. And it's wonderful. But nobody's making a killing in immigration law. That's one problem. The other problem is, even though we're charging as low as we can and we're making not a lot of money, it's still too high for most people to afford on there. And a very high percentage of people go without representation because they're just not going to be able to afford an immigration lawyer. And there's something like 70% of people that are in deportation proceedings, when they go in front of an immigration judge, don't have representation on there. And so what our idea was, if we could figure out ways to save lawyers a massive amount of time, so that they could then either lower their fees and both simultaneously lower their fees and take more cases, then we would really have something there. And that is what we have been working on with Visa AI, which right now is it's built on the largest immigration library in existence. On there, we have almost 500,000 books and documents that are in there. We have a full-time librarian as well as 2 people that are doing content testing for us, that are both lawyers that are basically have baseline tests, and we have scoring. And the whole idea is to really improve the output quality as much as possible. We're in about 600 law firms And our drafting product as well. When we've done our measuring, we believe it's saving lawyers about 90% of the time that it takes. So it's research, analysis, and drafting. I did want to also mention, just a plug for anybody that's from law schools, that our product is free for law school clinics. So anybody that, and I don't know if they're doing clinical immigration work here at Suffolk, but that's always my plug. I know there's Access to Justice folks here, and I'd like them to know that that exists, and just please reach out to me so I can make it happen for you guys. But this is Visa AI, and this is what our 2.0 is going to look like in about 10 days on there. So I get to use it right now. It's not vaporware. It actually is pretty cool, but they're still doing a lot of changing and testing on there. But it is it's really wonderful as far as like how lawyers are using it. So not going to say any more about that. The one last thing I wanted to say before I sort of gave my final thoughts, as well as one theme that I didn't mention going along here, but I figured it was worth mentioning at the end, is in each phase of tech, lawyers had big objections to that tech based on ethics grounds. Who remembers of the folks that raised their hands earlier about some of these old products where lawyers were, we can't have a website because it's illegal advertising on there. My state in Tennessee, you had to submit all advertisements ahead of time on there. How do you submit a website ahead of time on a site that you're updating 5 times a day on there? By the way, we reached an accommodation with our state bar where I put a log of all the changes, and they said that they would make an exception for me as long as they knew what I was changing, and I made it easy for them. Who remembers email? When people said that you couldn't use email ethically because it was hackable and it would violate, any host of violations, including confidentiality on there. There were like plenty of objections on there, and fortunately, basically that was part of the taking risk on there. Was like, I'm doing this website. I hope I don't lose my license on there. And I'm doing, I'm sending out this, emails to clients. I hope I'm not going to, get into trouble over that. That repeated itself within the social media age, where people say you're inadvertently creating attorney-client relationships, and you're doing. There were plenty of objections there as well. And now, I do a program probably every month on ethics and AI and complying with the, and what tools you can use, and if they're training on your data or there's humans in the loop somewhere in Kenya that are, looking for terms of service violations. There's a million different ways you can violate ethics rules with AI. But sort of the lesson I think from that is that, yeah, you need to pay attention to all those rules. You can't be completely cavalier and ignore them, but they can also paralyze you. And you could basically be stuck not innovating because you're just afraid that somebody's going to shut it all down at some point, or you're going to get into trouble. That's where, a lot of times that is the real gamble, I think, in some of these, where you take, it's the good news is for most of these tools, you can do them very inexpensively. I never had money for any of this stuff. It was basically, even the AI product later on, it was all bootstrapping from the law firm until eventually we had subscribers and we got some venture capital money. But it was a lot of the best stuff that's been available for the last 35 years, just lawyers put out. But with just time was the most valuable thing that they were putting into it, as opposed to massive amounts of money. I think Mark Lauritsen was just telling me about Richard Granite, who's a real, pioneer in the in this space, who was doing amazing projects for years and years and never had the massive money that to put into those projects. It's possible. So I will. These are these are the final lessons that I had. I'm happy. I think I probably used up all my time, so I will end there. But I did want to say that I really appreciate the invitation to come today. Like I said, I usually don't get to talk on this kind of topic. So hopefully some of the stuff, at least for people, probably some of you will enjoy probably some of the throwbacks, and hopefully some of the law students here can think about what they might want to do in their careers and some paths they could take. So thank you.